Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. These are just my notes on Unit 2. Unit 2 has two chapters, Chapter 3 and 4. Chapter 3 uses the example of Cinderella. To suggest that writers are influenced by other writers. And this is the gist of the summary or the main focus of this chapter, and that writers are influenced by other writers, and that's not necessarily plagiarism if you're influenced by other writers. Chapter 4 is about writing and revising, and it suggests that revising is an important aspect of writing, that authors go back and forth in revising their work. Okay, Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Chapter 3 then begins with the story of Cinderella, and first asks you to recall from your own mind what you remember of the story in 3 paragraphs. So you're supposed to write Cinderella in 3 paragraphs. It's important because you're going to use this and develop it and then submit it as part of the exam. So that's it begins that way, and then it gives one version of Cinderella, and this version is by Carole King, who is an American school author, and she, in her own words, gives her version of the story, and then you get a chance to compare what you thought the story was to what she wrote. Then the author asks which one of these 2 stories is quote correct. Okay, and the answer is neither, because Cinderella is a folk tale. Okay, Cinderella is a folk tale, meaning the author is unknown. It's like the story is so old that the original author is unknown. Okay, for example, a similar story as Cinderella's has been related in Chinese culture, in Middle Eastern cultures, in even American Indian culture. So it's almost like a story that belongs to the humanity, and nobody can claim to have invented the story. Okay. And then the chapter presents a different version of the story, that is the American Indian version. And when the French came to Canada, they brought the Cinderella story to this continent, and they took the American Indians took this and they spun it, so to speak, in their own cultural heritage, and the story is related as the Invisible One. This is an interesting rendition of the story. It hardly resembles the original Cinderella story, but this is presented in the text as well. So so there are innumerable versions of this particular Cinderella story, and really none of them are correct, and people have taken great liberties in settings like Cinderella story, for example, in a modern high school or something like that. So one could say, is this not plagiarism? Okay, this is not plagiarism because these versions, so to speak, are not plagiarism because of several reasons. Okay, and these are important to understand. Okay, one is that the author does not present the version as original and takes credit for the originals. Okay, so it's not plagiarism because the author, okay, does not take the original and tamper with it just a little bit here and there with commas and a few words here, a few sentences there. He does not take the original and present it as his or her own work. Okay, it's not like, say, I wrote this Cinderella story, for the first time in human history. It's not like that. So author does not take credit for the original. It does not take the original and present it as his own. Okay. Second thing is, in this case, as it is, the original is well known. Okay, is known or well known. So if somebody writes a story, kind of like a spoof of Star Wars, and then everybody knows Star Wars, and then nobody would say this is plagiarism, because Star Wars is so well known. Okay. Number 3. Okay, and this is not plagiarism like the American Indian version, because the author does not just take the original and tweak it here, there, and the new version is fundamentally different. Okay, is fundamentally different. In other words, there are many key changes. Is different. Is different in key elements. Okay. In key elements. So the new version is fundamentally different in key elements. So this is why the versions of these stories cannot be considered plagiarism. So that's the gist of this part of the chapter. The second part of the last part of this chapter, again we're still in chapter 3, okay, is about planning. Okay, planning your writing. Okay, this is very important. And writing is intimidating to many people, I think, because of this very simple thing that they don't plan. And planning doesn't mean a great strain on your mind, okay? It means very simple things. So one of the things that this chapter asks is to brainstorm 10 things about that you might do differently in a Cinderella story if you were to write your own version of the Cinderella story. So you would brainstorm 10 things that you would do differently, and from these 10 different variations of a story, you're supposed to pick the one that you might want to consider writing. For example, if I were to rewrite the Cinderella story, what would I do differently? Well, perhaps Cinderella would be poisoned in the end by her sisters or something like that, and the prince would never find her, or the sisters might use magic of their own and transform one of the sisters into Cinderella looking like girl or something like that. So you brainstorm, and then what you do is you basically planning here means just writing the story narrative in like simple basic plan like this. For example, okay, you might say, okay, I'm going to write my story in 5 paragraphs, let's say, okay, and first paragraph would be, I would describe Cinderella's plight, okay, her difficulties. And the second paragraph, I would introduce the ball and the fact that how she really wants to go to the ball, and she goes to the ball, and then she realizes the prince is not as princely as she thought, and she doesn't really like him, and the prince only likes her because she's so pretty or something like that. And the third thing is that instead of having the usual scenario, I would say one of the sisters recognized her. Okay, if sisters recognize the fact that this is actually her own sister Cinderella, and then she plots this, and then when they come to present them with the shoe, so the sister decides to poison her. Okay, and then finally, and the sister will use the same magic to turn herself into Cinderella. And then she ends up marrying the prince, and the prince has a very miserable life, which he deserves apparently in this version of the story, because he misjudged Cinderella, and he only wanted to marry her because of her beauty. That's what he would get for chasing after beauty. So this is now, regardless of the merit or demerits of that particular version, This is very useful. See, all you did is, this is the focus of my first paragraph, focus of the second paragraph, focus of the third paragraph, focus of the fourth paragraph, and focus of the fifth paragraph. This is planning. It's not like rocket science going to the moon and coming back or something like that type of planning. Just like bullet points of planning. And from this, it's easy to develop one paragraph. I mean, who can't write like one paragraph about Cinderella's plight, or the ball of poisoning, his sister poisoning, and then from there you have a story. So people find writing intimidating because they skip this planning phase, and it's just, how hard it is to come up with like 5 little things like that, right? So this is chapter 3. Again, in chapter 3, 2 key points were: one, that writers are influenced by other writers, and the second is that you have to plan your writing. So writers are influenced by, in fact, the best writers are those who read extensively. That's one of the points in this chapter. Chapter 4, picks up from here basically. Once you have written some piece of work, and the idea is that you have to constantly revise, constantly revise. The first time you write something, just put the words in paper. People are so self-conscious of making mistakes. They think that if they make a silly comma mistake, everybody will laugh at them or something like that. So no, you're going to correct them before you publish or something, So just chill and then just write the ideas on a piece of paper, because then you're going to revise it until you're pleased with it. So don't fall in the trap of being too self-conscious. Just write the ideas in paper, and then you revise it. When you do revise it, there are several things that you need to check. What kind of things you revise? First of all, simple grammar and punctuation. Put the commas where they belong, put the periods where they belong, right? And then so simple grammar and punctuation, and some transitions. If certain transitions are needed, if from one idea to another is too abrupt, how did this get over here, and how did the sister recognize, or what made it there? So if there are transitions or transition words that are necessary, you add those. So the one part of revising is basically the mechanics of revising. It's the grammar of revising. But on the second part of revising is actually content revising. In other words, is something that needs to be added? Is there something that needs to be added to explain the story further? For example, how does the sister have access to poison, or to the quote magic that she had? How does she have access to that? So you may have to add or subtract something that's silly or distracting. So these are content revisions. So the 2 parts of revision are the mechanics, the grammar, punctuation, transitions, and content revision, adding stuff that's necessary to make the story flow better, or not leave gaps in thinking, and also subtract things that are either redundant or distracting, or not distracting from the main thrust of the story. So the next part of chapter 4 is it takes you to a website. It takes you to certain websites of fairy tales. Why does it take you there? Because the point here is that writers need to do research, to get ideas. They need to do research, or to make the writing more effective. And this author takes you to a particular Sorla Lane, a folk tale website, and then ask you to go and do some research over there. Because research and writing are indispensable. If somebody wants to write a story about a certain time period, if they don't want to make 1,000 mistakes, they would actually want to research about that time period, about that particular topic. So here they're trying to introduce you to be able to be comfortable using different websites and what they have to offer you in terms of research. Okay, and then this author does one of these. In this chapter, he shows you how to plan and how to write an initial essay, and then he shows you how to revise his essay. So he takes you through this process using his own story that he has created about this troll, ox, and glass mountain bit, and he takes you to his own particular revision process. That's basically the whole summary of the chapter, and it asks you to go research a particular story and to read it and critique it, and it will make you go through this process of planning and writing, initial writing, and revising the writing to produce one of the essays in the chapter. So this is a summary of Unit 2, inshallah. Assalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.